Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Happy Africa Day from Washington, D.C. We celebrated and this YALI 10+10, an entire week to highlight the incredible leaders from across the continent and in the diaspora, to celebrate the past 10 years of the YALI program participants, and to look forward with great anticipation to the coming 10 years. As our keynote speaker this morning said, Ms. Ahuna Ezi-Koanawaro of UNDP, she said, the youth are our most precious resource. We're here to listen to you, to learn from you, and to celebrate you. I'm honored to serve as your moderator today for our panel on building an effective and resilient public service in Africa. As a former proud civil servant, I believe in public service and encouraging people to serve, whether is it at the national, regional, or local level, in the executive branch or the legislative branch. It's an honor to be able to do that. Before I introduce our distinguished speakers, let's spend a minute on terms. Our panel is about effective and resilient. Effective is success in producing desired or intended results. We want our public service and our public servants to be able to do that. Resilience is something that is both about people and about leadership. Resilient leaders have the ability to sustain their energy and under pressure, to cope with disruptive changes and adapt, to bounce back from setbacks, and they overcome major difficulties without engaging in dysfunctional behavior or harming others. Resilience is key. Public service is about service. We heard about servant leadership, and servant leadership is about listening and empathy, about persuading without being forceful, about conceptualizing and communicating a vision. It's about stewardship, which means accountability. And the main focus is on the people, which brings us back to public service. We want to serve the people for whom we work. So we want our session to focus on building an effective and resilient public service and to highlight some of the challenges and how to address them. We also hope to provide some concrete recommendations for how African youth in general and our YALI alumni in particular can work to build effective and resilient public service in your communities, your countries, and the continent. Let me briefly introduce our outstanding speakers, who will each speak about 6 minutes. I will ask our audience to read their bios, which are provided for you under the session thing here. We will first hear from YALI alumna and member of Parliament from the Kasanda District of Uganda, Her Excellency Flavia Kalule Nabagabe, a representative from the legislative branch of government, a Mandela Washington Fellow. We will then turn to our colleague from the Department of State, Dr. Jeanette Yarwood, who serves as the Senior Advisor in the Bureau of African Affairs. She has also served in staff and to members of Congress. Turning to the executive branch of government, we will hear from Ms. Wala Essam Albushi, YALA alumni, Mandela Washington Fellow, and the former Minister of Sport from the Republic of Sudan. And we will conclude with Judy Moore, former Minister of Public Works in Liberia, currently a Senior Policy Fellow here in DC at the Center for Global Development. After the 4 presentations, we'll open the discussion to questions and answers, and we want to hear from you. If your actions inspire people to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader. So said the 6th President of the United States, John Quincy Adams, who was also a member of Congress, a member of the Senate, an ambassador, served in all branches of government. Our 4 leaders today have done all of this and more. Let me turn over the program to you. Flavia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nancy. And okay, well, it's this side. This side, it's evening in Uganda. So I'll say, but in respect to different times, I greet you all. As introduced, my name is Flavia, and I am a newly elected member of Parliament of Uganda. You know, Uganda general election. We had one earlier year in January. We voted new leaders and a new president on January 14th, and so here we are. We just got our first session yesterday as a member of Parliament. Now, I will definitely tell you the effects and the top 3 challenges that you have in public service. And Dr. Nancy, thank you so much for defining for us what the resilient public to
just hope that you can all hear me. That I see in Africa is the lack
of independence of, because when you have all the three arms of government, that's the legislative government, the executive, and then the judiciary, intertwined and being controlled by only one branch of government, and in Uganda that happens a lot because the executive controls all the three arms of government. So that means that the public service and the public servants can't do their work independently because there's a lot of political interference all the time. And so even when decisions are affecting people on ground, they can't easily be implemented. A number of very beautiful, in fact, Uganda is credited to be one of the countries that has the best policies, some of the best policies in Africa and across the world, but the implementation is extremely difficult because of the constant interference by the executive in the work of the judiciary and the work of the legislative body. So that means that we have a serious challenge there and a serious gap that is always interfering with the work that they have to do. Now, this is accompanied by, of course, the dictatorship, because if you have a dictator that has run, and we know that Africa is mainly, run by dictators, people, leaders, presidents who have overstayed in power and need to just get a raise or need to be removed. Of course, when you constantly have a dictator as the head of a state, public service is going to be run under fear, intimidation. People will not be able to do the work as it should be done.
It will be done because someone, the political leader, really wants it to happen.
Now, this is coupled by the high and the huge amounts of that you find that government workers will start swindling public money. They will start using it for their own purposes, and among other things, their own things. And of course, the lack of accountability, because even when we have a number of bodies that are trying to ask for accountability from public servants, the citizens really need their services out there. But we have a general lack of political will to ensure that people are held accountable, the perpetrators are held accountable for all the wrongs that they are doing. That when you swindle money, are you jailed? Are you able to refund back that money? Can we be able to recover it as a country?
That you grapple with a lot in service provision,
especially that we have
Uganda, particularly, but also in Africa, because I believe our problems are sometimes common and shared. And so, if we had better leaders,
this is what
we can evolve to address some of these challenges, because some leaders actually do say that Africa's problem is not a lack of what to do, is not a lack of resources, it's not a lack of it's not a lack of, but it is actually a lack of leaders,
servant leaders that can be
and to ensure that
they respond directly and deeply to the concerns of ordinary citizens. And if we are not using these public service that we are given, then how are we going to use them if we are not addressing directly the issues of people? So that's why, for me, I'm particularly grateful to YALI, both YALIs, the Mandela Washington Fellowship and the Leadership Centers, for
of voluntarism, but also
inculcating the spirit of servant leadership in us. Because then when you're working in a public office, you're not only looking at yourself, you don't only concentrate on what you want, your self-interest, but you're concentrating on the interest generally of the ordinary citizen. You're trying to voice their concerns. But of course, this is always this always comes in as a backlash from, for example, in the legislation, if you have a minority, currently
you have a
parliament
529 members of parliament, but out of this,
so
you can see that if you have a majority of numbers that are in the ruling party,
of course, now we who are more pro-people, more pro-poor people, our voices will always be shut down because leaders speak
than concerns that the
ordinary citizen has, because they have someone that is controlling them from the word go. So if we can get more leaders that are willing to listen to their conscience, that are not willing to be easily corrupted,
put the country first before other things, then I guess we shall have better countries in Africa and better leadership, and thereby better and more resilient and effective public. Of course, if I cannot look strengthening our accountability
tools now.
We are monitoring going, is it flowing our money and all that, but I'm following to ensure money that was given out to render services, for example, build a hospital, build schools, provide water for people, is actually contained and
is actually utilized. Now, if we can have, we have the tools, the accountability tools available, but how do we strengthen them to be functional, fully functional, so that people can be able to see that they are working, not just as offices, mere offices, but do we get the big fish that are stealing that are stealing ordinary citizens' funds? Do we punish them by jailing them? Do we even further go ahead to ensure that they refund this money and not service to corruption and saying, well, we are somewhere? And I think for me, if we can also have
those that can look out for the interests
of people, and of course it goes first of all by removing the dictators that head our countries. Many of our countries are headed by dictators. If we can, as a citizenry, conduct as much civic awareness, civic education to them, so that citizens can be confident enough to say enough is enough and be able to respond to the needs and concerns, and even host bad leaders from our countries, then I guess we shall have better ways of dealing with our public service and ensuring effective service delivery. Now, as I conclude, because I know the 6 minutes, as I conclude, I am thinking of how well we can do this. Yes, Nancy, are you saying something? Okay, so I am concluding with 2 concrete actions that I think African youth can be able to pass on in order to ensure that we build effective public service in Africa. First of all, as African youth, we shall not continue complaining of the past problems and the problems that we have and blaming them on past leaders. This is our time now. In Uganda, we refer to ourselves as the now generation. What can we do in the now generation? What we don't want to be lamenting about. We have closed the book of lamentation. We are actually moving into the book of what? The book of Revelation. So this is what we are looking out for. 1, do not be shy about contesting for political offices.
We have actually realized that
politicians make the decisions, and public services mainly run on the political willingness of politicians. So because largely Parliament makes the laws and makes the policy, and then the executive implements it, and the judiciary. Of course, if we can have independent, then we can be better off. But then how do we have the independent institutions? If we can change our laws, amend our laws, so that it's not the president. For example, in Uganda, the president appoints the chief justice. In Uganda, the president is the one. Of course, the president is voted by the people, but ours is always rigging our votes, just like I belong to the National Unity Platform and the leading opposition political party currently in Uganda, and I'm the chairperson of the Women's League. But we are robbed of our victim, broad daylight. So if we do not have a president who is always monetizing the politics, buying off all the leaders, and if we have credible leaders, so young people need to, if you feel you are a public servant and you can create better change, or if you feel you're tired of wherever you're feeling, and young people usually say, oh, those politicians, stop the rhetoric of just saying those politicians and contest and be the politician you want your country to have.
Thank you.
Take the place of other people. But of course, we ensure that public servants, a study was done by a number of by an organization called the Forum for Women in Democracy. It's in Uganda, about public service, and they realized that so many leaders in the public service sector are actually men and not women. So if we can increase the numbers of women in key leadership positions in public service, because women have been said to be more morally upright and can provide better services than men. So if probably have more of them in leadership, we can then have better service provision in our countries and all wherever we want to go. So I'll
Thank
end
you.
with a quotation. And
Can I
my
ask you, why don't you save the quote for our inspirational thing, and then we will give our other speakers some time. Thank you
thank you
for
so
those
much.
excellent.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Let's turn the microphone as Flavia mutes herself. We will turn the microphone over to our colleague from the State Department, Dr. Jeanette Yarwood. Jeanette, all yours.
Great. Thank you, Nancy. I'm very excited to be here with you all today to celebrate 10 years of YALI. I have always been so impressed by all of the fellows and participants, and I am actually overjoyed to share the stage with you all. As was mentioned, I have worked in public service all my career, and I also work on African youth issues. Today, I will be addressing why an effective and resilient public service matters. And I'm going to start by addressing two challenges in fostering effectiveness and resilience in public service. The provision of goods and services is an important aspect of socioeconomic development. Access to basic services such as clean water and sanitation, healthcare, schooling, and transportation enhances citizens' day-to-day well-being. Access to roads and telecommunication systems lower transaction costs, leading to improvements in trade and economic activities. These are important functions of governments in society, and an effective and resilient means that governments should be able to provide these services for their citizens, even under difficult circumstances and beyond individuals, administrations, or specific crises. Two challenges in fostering an effective and resilient public service that I'll focus on specifically are corruption and service delivery. And I'm going to give actually a specific instance of service delivery. I want to just say that these challenges are not unique to Africa, especially when we think about something like corruption. I always think it's important to say that they're not unique to Africa, and this impacts governments around the world. Addressing corruption in service delivery is important because if citizens' experiences and interactions with their governments are negative, this can lead to citizens losing their overall confidence in their government. And according to Afrobarometer survey data, someone who has experienced bribery is more likely to support anti-corruption and or service delivery protests. And we all know that that can impact the functioning of societies, right? If young leaders remain committed to anti-corruption work and improve service deliveries for citizens, this will have long-term impact on their societies. Over the last 10 years, there have been many mechanisms put into place to address these specific challenges. I know that many countries across Africa have committed to eliminating corruption. This is evident in the addition of many new laws that are specific to anti-corruption. There are public finance laws and whistleblower laws and other types of protections. And we have seen commitments from governments, leaders, religious leaders, and professional organizations in their attempts to work on corruption. That said, we do know that this has been with varying success over the last 10 years. And so obviously there's more work to be done, and I'm going to go into that a little bit more. In the area of service delivery, it is clear that citizens are demanding better services and better access to services. As I noted, citizens are very willing to go out into the streets. And so oftentimes governments, in response are attempting to simplify the way citizens can access services, or by removing bureaucratic barriers, or ensuring, things that like citizens that live outside of urban areas, ensuring that they can have access to goods and services as well. I would say that one example for me on service delivery, it would be, I'm thinking especially like community healthcare workers. I recently, and to me that can be counted as a success. I recently read a report that highlighted that in the first month of the COVID pandemic, South Africa retrained 27,000 HIV and TB community health workers who went on to screen more than 11 million people, or about 20% of the population, for COVID-19. I heard similar anecdotal reports around, from around the continent. What this highlights to me is that upfront investment in community service workers, in these community healthcare workers, are yielding benefits, really in the long term. And so that's, one area that I think we see something that's effective and to be honest with you, resilient. Two concrete, and I'm going to address that a bit in a moment. Two concrete and important actions that can be taken to address some of these current challenges. And I mentioned that I'm speaking specifically about anti-corruption and or public service work. It would be, when I think about, anti-corruption work, certainly you can address it the governance perspective with laws. But another way to address this and concrete action that can be taken is to train civil society and journalists, because in many ways they act as an accountability measure. The fight against corruption requires a comprehensive, holistic, and systems-oriented approach with equal attention paid to building prevention and accountability mechanisms on the government side. And then from civil society, you train them, you train the media, you train, even the private sector, and they can hold governments and businesses accountable. So for me, I think in addition to the laws, one has to think about training civil society, journalists, and other citizen actors. Secondly, and I think this is, it's a different kind of action that one can take. If I were to highlight anything for young African leaders, to me, it would be to ensure that you are building effectiveness and resilience into public service. This means that you have to ensure that all of that hard work that you're doing, across the government is enduring. You are bound to go on to other jobs. And so we've got to make sure that these things stay within your society. So when I sort of talk about the community health workers, right? I mean, nobody knew about a pandemic, but they were able to shift really quickly to, sort of gear up to do this. And so what this tells me is perhaps that kind of model could work for something else. You could bring, community health clinic, or you could bring some other services directly to the community. So in terms of public service, I think we kind of can think about moving away from just urban areas to rural areas, even in urban areas to the outskirts. Not everybody has to come in. That impacts traffic. So again, I think one of the things that we've got to think about as public servants all the time is, I want things to be better when I leave my job. How do I leave that legacy, right? And then also training citizen activists. I'm going to stop there and let my fellow panelists continue on, and I look forward to your questions in a bit.
Many thanks, Dr. Jeanette Yarwood. We turn over the program now to the former Minister of Sport from Sudan, Ms. YALI Essam Al-Bushi. YALI, the floor is yours. Please unmute. Please unmute. Thank you.
Yes, sorry. So thank you, Nasi, my fellow panelists, and all my brothers and sisters. I always say that the present and future young leaders of the continent. Good day. I'm extremely honored and humbled to speak before you today on this special day, the 10th anniversary of the YALI program. And myself, I'm very proud to be a Mandela Washington Fellow 2016 cohort. And I always say it's a life-changing experience because it brings all the young Africans from across the continent together. And for me, it was a perfect definition of being a public servant. You meet, fellow Africans who are fighting against, poverty, standing for human rights from all walks of life. That's why I always say it's a life-changing experience. And I always say that, Africa is very rich and wealthy, but Africa is richest because of the young people of the continent. As you may know, to build a nation, we need to build a strong public service and strong, public institutions. When we talk about, health system, education, all what has been have been mentioned by my fellow panelists, we need to think about building, the public institutions itself. As you may know, in Sudan, we are going through a transitional period after the revolution, the 2018 revolution. The revolution was led by the young people of Sudan, and we managed to topple 30 years of, of this extremism, destruction, and dictatorship. But, the landmark was that it was led by the young people of Sudan, which means that the young people can bring change when they believe, in a certain cause. And the slogan of the revolution was peace, freedom, and justice. And we need these. And I always say that these are the 3 pillars to build a healed nation. I was honored to serve my people after the signing of the constitution document, after the revolution, as the Minister of Youth and Sport, not the Minister of Sport only, it was the Minister of Youth and Sports, and was the youngest minister in the cabinet and the youngest female minister in the history of Sudan. And I'm mentioning this to bring the attention of my fellow young African. You are never too young, to take the lead and to make difference in your country all across the continent. That's why I like the point when my fellow panelist, Flavia, when she said that we need to stop complaining and we need to be part of the change itself. So one of the biggest, challenges that we faced during our time in the government, that after 30 years of destruction, the public institutions were completely, destroyed. Because when we talk about efficient public service, we need to think about the institutions that, are providing those services. So one of my main mission when I was at the ministry is to rebuild, the institution, and lots of work had to be done in those institutions. I would like to talk from the, the government perspective. We needed to restructure the institution, to evaluate even the competency of the employees of the ministry, and to redefine, the mission and vision, and even to design and to redefine their job description. And I think one of the major challenges in Africa, that for the people to think that being a government employee is not glamorous, enough. So fresh graduates don't apply for public service positions. Also, governments don't pay attention when it comes to capacity building and training. That's why the level of efficiency in our public institution is very low, and everyone is complaining about how bad its government services are. That's why the government of Sudan tackled one of these challenges by increasing the wages of, to improve the wages of the employees, to improve the job satisfaction among employees. And also at the ministry, we started to design a comprehensive training programs. Also, we provided opportunities for the young people to join the ministry through our fresh graduate program, because surprisingly, we found that only 5% from the working force were below the age of 35. Can you imagine? Only 5% of the work of the Ministry of Youth and Sports, there are only 5% below the age of 35. Also, during my time as a ministry, I decided to make sure that I listen directly to the young people about their vision, aspiration, challenges, and their expectations. One of the things that I did, I met around 10,000 young people from around the 12 states, in Sudan, in villages, big cities, internal displacement camps, and localities. And this is one of my recommendations toward building a resilient and efficient public service from the government perspective, that we need to make sure that stakeholders are the main partners. They should be listened to and involved in every single step. So communication is key. One of the challenges as well is data. Data is a major challenge, I think, in Sudan and across the continent. We lack of a reliable and accessible and recent data. And when we talk about public service, one of the things that, one of the issues that we need to tackle is data. And one of the things that we did, we designed a pilot program where we collected data by surveys from across the country. And also when we talk about data, we need to be inclusive. That's why we collect data from prisons, from internal displacement camps, from youth from different educational background. As you know, educational levels varies, and also from the youth with disability. And we always tend to not to be inclusive when it comes to youth with disability. That's why we need to be inclusive when we talk about data. Another challenge for our public institution is digitalization and technology, which is key for providing timely and efficient services. And this is one of the things, areas that I think we have across the continent. We have a problem when it comes to digitalization of the public institution. So finally, my recommendations for my fellow YALI community and my fellow African youth are as follows. First of all, let's challenge the preconceived ideas about public institutions. And also we need to rebuild our trust when it comes to public institutions. We need to be part of the change and run to offices and to become public servant with decision-making abilities. We need to be in the front line, and of course, volunteering and volunteerism. Also, like joining the parliaments and legislative councils, and because we need to hold our government account. And I'm very happy that we have a young fellow, one of our fellows panelists is part of the Ugandan parliament. Also, the young African, you are the generation of modern technology, and and that's why we need the young people to have their initiative in digitalization and the modernization of our public institution. So my final recommendation is you need to take the lead. We need to make sure that to complain less and do more and to take actions. Africa depends on us and you and the change. So every one of us should be the change we want to see in Africa. And above all, we need to work together, hand by hand. And this is one of the things that I admire the most about the YALI, that brings the young Africans together from different backgrounds. As you know, we always say, we united, we stand, divided, we fall. Thank you very much. Bless you.
Thank you very much. And forgive me for forgetting to include youth in your previous title. An important part of your portfolio as Minister of Youth and Sport, especially given the conference that we are all participating in today. Our final speaker is from Liberia, the former Minister of Works, Judy Moore, who is now in Washington, D.C. The floor is yours.
I was muted. Thank you, Nancy. And again, thanks to my fellow panelists. Thanks to everyone who's here today. It's a pleasure to be here. Happy Africa Day. Very excited. And, congratulations to YALI on 10 years. I think I just wanted to structure my comments just quickly so I can try to get over the stuff that I want to talk about. One is around just the difficulty of what it means to be a young person in public service, right? When I was appointed Minister of Public Works, I was in my mid-30s. And the Liberian system is sort of fashioned after the US system, where the president makes the appointment, but then the Senate confirms. And the Senate Committee on Public Works held up my confirmation because they said, the boy is too small for the job, right? And this is something that young people will encounter on the continent in a lot of instances where there's an assumption that youth equals the inability to be able to take on responsibility. So, but that doesn't mean we stop trying, right? Obviously, in the end, I got confirmed and was able to do that. So one is this expectation, or that young people are going to be incapable of being able to deliver on high responsibility. The second was the difficulty in greening the core of the public sector, right? So across the public sector, you have an aging workforce, and in a lot of instances, there isn't a systematic way of being able to get younger people into the system. We have people in the system who have been there for such a long time, are no longer functioning properly, but are incapable of getting out. And so there is no space to get more young people in. And one of the things that we did in Liberia was we created something called the President's Young Professional Programs. And the President's Young Professional Program, PYP, was very competitive, where we took young people locally from local universities who were sort of the presidential management fellows here, but from Liberia. And I'm very pleased because when I was Deputy Chief of Staff to the President's young professionals, the 4 that I recruited and worked with, all 4 of them went on to get advanced degrees. All 4 of them went up to higher leadership positions across government and the private sector. And they remain in Liberia today working. It's difficult for us to insist that young people be a part of the public service, young people come into government, and then we create no avenues and no paths for them to be able to do that. It's just very, very difficult. So I think one of the ways that we can get to do this is to be able to work with governments to create this kind of path that allows young people to be absorbed into government. And before I conclude, one of the things that I want to say is how important political leadership is. I want to just affirm what my fellow panelists have said before me. In the 20 years, in a decade and a half before the Civil War in Liberia, the military in Liberia was seen as a repressive and oppressive force. So if a Liberian in that time was in trouble and saw a military person, they would run away from them and not toward them, simply because there was no history of the military helping people. Then we get the Ellen Johnson Sirleaf administration that says, first, you have to have at least a high school education to be in the military. To be an officer, you have to have an undergraduate degree. There was a big riot in Monrovia in 2016, I think. And when everything was destroyed and dirty, it was actually the military that came and cleaned it. Across the countryside in Liberia, we have the military building roads. We have a whole generation of Liberians who do not know what it means to have a repressive military. The only reason we have that difference is the quality of political leadership. Leadership matters. And so if we're going to see any difference in the quality of life and productive quality of life of the African person, then we have to pay attention to political leadership. And that political leadership is going to happen if it is backed by economic leadership. So for all of the YALI fellows, those who are going into business, those who are going into politics, if we assume that politics is dirty and that the people who are drawn to politics are corrupt people, then it will become a self-fulfilling prophecy, because the good people will stay away from public life and only the corrupt people will be drawn to public life. So everyone needs to find a way to be able to participate somehow as best as they can. So if it means when you're in college to participate in college politics, then do it. If it means for you to join the youth wing of a political party, then do it. But not everyone has to go into politics. Some people can go into business. And with the resources you earn in business, you can support the kinds of politicians that you expect to see. That's how we're going to change. The final thing that I would say why political leadership matters is that for us Africans and people who look like us, the best things that have happened to us have happened because our leadership have stepped up. Where I'm in the US right now, in the Western Hemisphere, the first country to abolish slavery was Haiti. It wasn't the United States. I mean, the United States doesn't, 1861, they were fighting a civil war, right? Almost half a century before the US even abolishes slavery. It is Haitians, right? Colonialism didn't end because Europeans suddenly became tired of colonialism. It was African leaders agitating for colonialism to end. So if we're going to build the continent we want to see, if we're going to build an Africa that thrives, an Africa where the young African can be able to live out their full potential, then political leadership matters, economic leadership matters. And it doesn't matter how young you are, we need to enter into the realm of leadership as best as we possibly can and as early as we possibly can. Thank you.
5 minutes and 58 seconds. Much appreciated. Thank you to all of our speakers. I am inspired, and I'm sure our audience is hearing the very similar themes from different parts of the continent and from different jobs held by colleagues from the continent as well as here in the United States. Let us turn over the discussion to some of the questions that have come from our participants, and thank you very much for sending them in. First question, and take this, let me know if you could just sort of wave and I will call on you. what accounts for the decline in public service, and talk a little bit more about how to encourage young people to pursue public service careers. Who would like to first jump in on that? You've all addressed that, but I think our audience is looking for some more thoughts. YALI, do you want to take that? Unmute yourself, please.
So the first part of the question again, Nancy, please.
Is what accounts for the decline in public service, and then talk a little bit more about how to encourage young people to come into public service.
As I said during my remarks, that we need to change the preconceived ideas about the public service. Like, people think that if you become a government employee, it's not glamorous enough, and people sometimes tend to look about it from a financial perspective. But if we are a generation that we really care about our countries, and we need to build a future for generations to come, we need to think about the higher purpose. But of course, the governments need to do more in improving the job environments, to be inclusive for both female and male, for young people, for people with a disability. So of course we need for the government to do its work when it comes to job satisfaction and environment. And also, as I said, we need to develop certain skills and to have a proper capacity building program. When it comes to the young people, Africa, it's very simple. Africa is a young nation. The majority of the population of Africa is young people below the age of 35. We keep complaining about our political leaders. We keep complaining about how economic situation is bad. We cannot develop our continent without public service, without government, without being part of that change. And also, I need for my fellow young Africans, not to think about in Sudan, for instance, the most of the young people, they tend to become engineers, doctors, because we need lawyers, we need politicians, we need people like young people to work in the agricultural sector. So I just want them to think of Africa and the potential of Africa, and they need to be part of that change. Like, let's assume 15 years of now, when we look back, you need to be proud of something that that you have been part of.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Flavia, do you want to add to that? Please unmute yourself.
Hello.
Yes.
I actually want to just say one thing. I think Africans especially young Africans, just need to believe more in themselves and believe that they can actually occupy these public service spaces. Because when you hear public service, most of the times people think they are meant for the older people, the older generation, and us, the young ones, cannot really fully occupy those spaces. That even when we are appointed in this position, some of us need a lot of encouragement, and in order for us to claim the space and occupy it boldly and serve in it boldly. But I think we just need to know that these spaces, everything is learned. I usually tell people there is no one born with the experience to serve in a public office, but you learn it on the job, and you don't work alone, you work with a team. So it is important that in public service, you build the right team that is going to help you grow, but also that is going to be more interested in serving people and enabling you to realize some of the aspirations you may want, and the dreams and the change that you may want to see within a community. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you. Working in government is very much part of the team. I think all of us have had experiences, and it's not just something that pertains to countries on the African continent. You come into government, you start a new job. There were definitely jobs I could never have done had it not been for colleagues and mentors, male and female. And it's being part of the team and feeling that you're part of the team, and the leadership is creating that team spirit. Jeanette, did you want to talk about this, please? Thank you.
Yeah, there's something that I actually have found through traveling, through various countries. young people are often at the forefront of change in their countries. They're the ones on the street. Look, I followed Sudan very, very closely. I was working in Congress then. I remember we had a hearing at the forefront of change, sometimes in removing certain, leaders from government. But then what I tended to hear in traveling around the continent would be, but I don't want to be part of the problem. So then after the revolution, they don't want to go into government because there's a stigma. They think I'll be part of the problem. I really encourage young people to sort of shift that perspective and realize that you can be part of the change. You can change your society by, rolling your sleeves up and really getting the work done. But you work so hard to make these changes. You're at the forefront, and you just have to drive it home by really doing the hard work afterwards.
Thank you. Jude, do you want to comment, please?
Yeah, it's just I think part of it is, and I covered this when I spoke, that governments across, at least in our region, in a lot of instances, the government, the state is probably the largest in terms of providing jobs. There's not much of a private sector. And so people in government jobs, even long after they're no longer effective, they're no longer adding value, continue to hang on to those jobs. And we have few mechanisms of actually getting young people into position. So that ought to change in terms of our engagement with partners. Maybe that's an area that we need to look. When I finished graduate school, the reason I was able to go back and work in Liberia easily was because there was a program that was recruiting Liberians from overseas and taking them back home. And that immersion, that process that allowed us to be able to reintegrate after we'd been out of the country for a while helped. So I think, yeah, we can encourage young people to do it, but unless we create mechanisms, it just becomes really, really difficult for them to be able to assume those roles.
Thank you all. We have another question, again, to any and all of you. How do we break the reliance on outside aid and amplify Black African voices and narratives from those most directly impacted by the problems we are trying to solve? Who would like to address this first? My colleagues, none of you are bashful. YALI, the floor is yours.
I think this is a very brilliant question. We need to capitalize on our natural resources. If we would like to get out of this, vicious circle of relying on international aids, we need to capitalize on what we have. Like I always say, in Sudan, we have the land. We have like great opportunity when it comes to agriculture. That's why I'm calling on my fellow, young Africans. We need to think out of the box, even from our side. Like, we need to think about growing our small businesses. We need to think about all the and also let's not think about there's a fast solution. If we would like to build a strong nation, we need to be patient. One of the things that now we are facing in Sudan, sometimes people in Sudan, and I think also in Africa, we have very high expectations. We need to realize our challenge, to know that in order to have sustainable solution to those challenges, it's need time, and we need to be patient. If we focus on that and we focus on what we have when it comes to natural resources, I think we can end the circle of relying on international aid.
Thank you. Who else would like to jump in here? Flavia? Unmute.
That question is interesting about how we break the stigma surrounding. I think it was about breaking the reliance on outside aid and amplifying Black African voices. I think as Africa, okay, of course, as a continent, this is a double-edged sword to me, and I usually tell people this, because as Africa, we cannot work alone. Any nation can't work alone and can't stand alone. Of course, being Africa, we are very wealthy and we have a number of resources where we can even be self-reliant. But unfortunately, despite the fact that we desire so much to to break aid and not to be able to rely on outside interference. For some reasons, we cannot do without it, because I'll just give an example of Uganda. Uganda as a country is trying, we are trying to fund our own budget, and we are just going to pass the 2021-2022 budget, financial budget. But the budget for the financial year 2021 and 2022, but you'll find that the biggest percentage of it relies heavily on aid. And for us, the question of aid is tricky, and so it needs a deeper discussion and further time. But what we have to say is, if we can even get this aid and utilize it in the right way, because right now we are struggling with a debt burden of billions of shillings from this aid, but even we don't see what that aid did. You know, it doesn't translate into the lives of people, in improving lives and sustaining communities, because we have a few people that borrow this money on our behalf, and then they use it for their personal gain and influence. So I think for me, it's a double-edged sword. We need the aid, but how do we use it? But also, can we sustain ourselves? Because I have seen our president blasting blasting the foreign agencies and blasting ambassadors and telling them off. But at the same time, he keeps running back to them. He keeps telling them we can manage and we are getting our oil, but he keeps running back to them. So I think we, realistically speaking, we still need to rely on the outside aid because of a number of factors, depending on which sector we are even looking at, because of a number of reasons at the same time. And at the same time, if we can work as a country and as we young Africans, can we be able to work towards reducing the debt, the aid and the debt burdens that we are getting? Because I know my country is going to pay debts, and even our grandchildren will find those debts and be able to pay them without even having gained much out of them. So for me, I think that's my take on that. I'm reading a number of books around how we can become more independent as Africa without entirely relying on the aid of other countries, but it's still a very tricky position because of very obvious reasons that most of us here know, because we work in government.
Thank you. Colleague from the State Department, do you have thoughts on this, or do you want to take a pass? Go for it.
If you have additional questions, I'll take a pass. If not,
Right, no, all fine. Mr. Moore.
Yes, ma'am. So I think, you know, obviously this question comes up again and again, and is one that we struggle with. So the way I like to see it, I like to think about it in a number of ways. One is just the structure. We come back to public service. The kind of structural changes required for Africa to become, for most African countries, especially south of the Sahara, to become economically vibrant and sustained economic growth. That kind of structural change occurs over decades. It occurs over successive administrations. So we have politicians who are focused on winning the next election, and so focused on short-termism. And because the long-term effect you may not benefit from doing something long-term, there isn't an incentive. So first we have the misaligned incentives. So we need public leaders who are thinking of building a legacy. Because if you're not thinking of building a legacy, then you're just going to focus on short-term things. You're going to focus on building roads in places where you get votes, not in places where it actually helps the economy. You focus on building infrastructure in places where maybe in your hometown or somewhere where you get political benefit and not economic benefit. So I think that's one of the things. The second thing is the same people who offer us aid also structure the international economic system so that it doesn't benefit us, right? Primarily, what is exported from Africa is unprocessed natural resources. And what is imported into Africa is finished goods. So all of African minerals, all of Africa's chrome and iron ore and cobalt and coltan is produced elsewhere. It's supporting jobs elsewhere. It's creating value elsewhere. It's creating wealth elsewhere. Except in Africa, it's largely extractive. So it comes back again to, what are we using aid for? If we're using aid to help build the systems that help grow our economies, yeah. If we're just using aid as a means of being able to go one day after the other and not thinking long term, then it becomes really, really hard. So it comes back to this question of political leadership. Until we can have the quality of leadership that's actually making long-term choices, I think we're going to come back 10 years from today and be discussing these same questions.
Thank you. There are several questions. Theme in some of the additional questions is, how do you, the question is, I understand that as youth, we need to leave the Book of Lamentations, but how is that possible if we have leaders who turn a blind eye to us after elections? And another question is, how can we fight effectively against corruption in an environment polluted by poverty and unemployment? So give us some thoughts. Give us some thoughts on that, and then we will wrap up. Who would like to start? And let's make this very quick because we have 5 minutes, and I want to make sure everybody has an opportunity for a final word.
This time?
You certainly may.
Outstanding. So I'm going to be really, really quick. I finished high school in refugee camp in Cote d'Ivoire. And when I was in refugee camp in Cote d'Ivoire, we didn't get good water, and I got sick, dysentery, and I almost died. And but eventually, somehow, I managed to get out of refugee camp and return to Liberia. And along the way, when I was in refugee camp, I heard about this university that gives students full tuition scholarships. That's basically how I ended up where I ended up. The point I'm trying to make is that the person, Jude Moore, who's making this speech today, who's Georgetown, CGD, there was nothing in my past, nothing in my being in refugee camp that said that I would end up in the position that I'm in today. And so simply because you're where you are today, it says nothing about the future you're going to have. So my intent is that the thing I would say to that, let my life be an example. Of course, everybody's not going to be able to do that. You can go from being a refugee kid who's basically going to die to being the Minister of Works in Liberia and control the infrastructure building in the country. Wherever you are, you stop there. You use what you have. Like when I was in a refugee camp, the most things I could do for myself is just simply go to school. Do what you can with what you have, and the opportunities will come. And that's where I want to start.
Thank you. And so when you answer this question, we have 3 minutes left. Jeanette, Wala, Flavia, 1 minute each, and I really will cut you off, and then I will take the final minute. Jeanette, yours.
I'm sorry, I actually need to hear the question again.
Just give us some inspiration. How do you overcome corruption, and what is your message to our YALI participants listening today about public leadership?
Sure. I mean, I think that you've got to work for the society that you want, right? I mean, that is ultimately, my ultimate belief. I think that I'm always impressed by the stories that I hear and read about across the continent. They're young people standing up for democracy, creating innovative businesses, working to make their societies better. And so, I mean, my words of inspiration are really just keep doing what you're doing. I mean, just keep on working hard to make your societies better. You are an inspiration, really to the world, to be honest with you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll leave it there.
Terrific. Wala? 1 minute.
Yes, I'll go first for the corruption. When it comes to corruption, of course, we need leaders and laws and so on. But the most important thing is we need awareness, because we need the general public, to hold the government accountable. And also because when it comes to corruption is not about, stealing millions of dollars. It starts from bribing, in the streets. So we need to fight corruption at so many levels. So fighting corruption depends on raising awareness. When you have the awareness raised, then you can hold your government accountable, and you cannot be a corrupt person as well. So, and also my message for my fellow young African across the continent, that, happy YALI anniversary. And also, I would like to say that you are never too young to make a difference in this life. And I always quote, our leader, Nelson Mandela, when he said that, sometimes it falls upon generation to be great. You can be that great generation. Let your greatness blossom.
Thank you. Madam Nabagebe.
Thank you, Nancy, for that. And for me, I'll just say one thing quickly, is I think in order for you to move away from lamentations, you have to be engaged. How do you want to get engaged? I usually ask young people if there's an election, what role are you playing in that election, and how vital are you in that election? Are you the one that just dances or sings praises to everyone, or are you the one that is either contesting, or the one that is either campaigning for this person, or the one that is planning for the campaign, or changing people? Even because even by participating in an election, you are changing mindset, you are changing your community. So what role are you playing in there? And that's how you live Lamentations, because if you play such a role, it's easier for you to hold your leaders accountable rather than sitting back and watching and afterwards abusing every politician or every public servant that you meet, and yet you never engaged at a point where you needed to change.
Terrific.
So
You have a quote for us from before. Can you share your quote from before?
Yes, please. And my quote is just this. Courage is the most important of all virtues, because without it, you cannot practice any other virtue consistently. So it's important that as young people, as YALI alumni, and as young people in Africa, we are courageous enough to take head on whatever challenges our continent is grappling with. Because if we do not garner the courage to be able to do that, our continent is going to go to the dogs and we shall continue lamenting. Thank you very much. Happy Africa Day and happy YALI anniversary.
Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking our speakers for their insight, their wisdom, their resilience, and their leadership. Please join me in thanking Ambassador Green, Dr. Mayangwa, and the entire amazing team at the Wilson Center. Those throughout the government who have provided the resources for you, our alumni, our YALI alumni, to soar. As someone who has served as a civilian in the United States Department of Defense, I think it's important to note that those who serve in uniform and those who serve as civilians can learn from each other. Here's something from the cadets at the United States Military Academy at West Point, but applies to all of you. Risk more than others think is safe. Care more than others think is wise. Dream more than others think is practical. Expect more than others think is possible. Know how much we believe in you and how much we believe in Africa's future. Thank you all very much for a wonderful program and for participating. It's been an honor to serve you today. Goodbye.